So Invincible Season 3 just ended, and yep, that was more Invincible. It seems like we're now settled in with Invincible being a yearly release, and on one hand, that's kinda nice. I've called Invincible the closest thing we have to American Shonen, and I like having it consistently come out every year, because I don't like having to wait. But that's also because this season was, in my opinion, not as strong narratively as Season 1 or 2. And if I had to wait like 3 years for it, I probably would have been a little disappointed. But honestly, the wait between Season 2 and 3 felt almost non-existent. And I really like that they did away with that stupid half-season break bullshit. You don't need to build artificial hype for this show. I'm pretty sure people like it by now. But yeah, like I said, I do think the plot for this season was a little less engaging for me. This season at times felt very Monster of the Week, and Invincible has felt like that before, but most of the time when Mark is dealing with stupid stuff, it's somehow connected to the overall plot, or we cut back periodically to the characters that are actually doing something important. This season, it feels like the oncoming Viltrumite threat that was set up last season doesn't really matter until like the last episode. Amazon Studios got to save a lot of money on their J.K. Simmons and Seth Rogen recording time because I think they're only in like one episode. And I wouldn't really have a problem with this if Mark's story was a little more interesting. I personally get tired of the edgy, pissed off symbiote protagonist shit pretty quickly. This season features Mark in his darker costume, dealing with darker problems and acting basically the same except a little more upset. Mark's main struggle this season is centered around what he and his fellow heroes should be allowed to do for the greater good, mainly in regards to killing people. But his moral compass in this season is completely out of whack. He becomes kind of a narc and he really wants to put everybody in prison all of a sudden. He beefs with Cecil all season, even though Cecil's kind of the only person stopping Earth from being turned into a pile of ash. And now I'm not saying this inner conflict is bad or anything, I'm just saying it's kinda tedious. In a superhero story, we naturally want to see our main character grow past these problems that they're dealing with. And Mark doesn't really get to yet. He spends the whole season being pissed off or sad, and there's not enough of an emotional release by the end of it. And it really doesn't help that we've kinda seen this superhero narrative done a million times. Most of the episodes end with Mark and Eve sitting on that damn roof or on that fuck-ass bridge talking about what they learned today. And Mark is always like, man, I'm really sad about what happened in this episode. And then Eve is like, it's okay, it wasn't your fault. Seriously, I feel like most episodes just kind of boil down to that. But I'm glad that hopefully after the events of this season, Mark will likely be set down a more satisfying path in the next one. And I wouldn't mind all of this if the side characters had more to do this season. The only person I think I really liked this season who wasn't Mark is Cecil. He's always been a well-written character, but here we get a lot more insight into what makes him tick. And I think he's one of the best characters of this season. But that's kinda it. Like last season, we had compelling storylines for Donald, Debbie, Omni-Man, Alan, and Rex, but here we just kinda get Invincible and Cecil. I think this season would have been a perfect time to flesh out Eve a little bit more, and one big issue I have is that Eve and Mark's relationship feels a little rushed and unnatural in this show. See, last year I said I'd start reading the comic, and I finally begun to do so, but I'm not that far. I promise, by the time we're back here to review Season 4, I will be done with the Invincible comic. That shit is long, okay? It's like One Piece for Americans. And one big difference between the comic and the show is that Mark and Eve interact a lot more in the comic before they start dating. They actually have a ton of time to get to know each other, but in the show, they really don't, because Season 1 is focused so heavily on the Omni-Man murder mystery. Whenever Eve is featured in the show, she's on her own dealing with real-world problems or her fucking stupid parents.
You fat ass!
So when her and Mark start dating here, it feels like it kind of just happens. Her declaration of love in Season 2 felt out of place because, like, she doesn't really know Mark that well. They haven't hung out that often from our perspective. And this season kind of carries that energy, though I do think by the end of the season they go through enough for their relationship to feel a little more consistent. I just wish it felt more natural from the start, though. And of course, I don't want to make it sound like the show sucks. I still like watching it week to week. I just think that this overall arc is one of the weaker ones. And I do think that while the show could certainly look better, I think the overall animation is just kind of acceptable. When it needs to look good, it looks good. And most of the time, the show doesn't really need to look that good, I guess. I don't really need Rooftop Scene number 5 to have godlike animation. Honestly, we either get yearly Invincible seasons or we get seasons with the same amount of content, except they come out every 2 years and with slightly better animation. Honestly, I prefer the first one. Anybody complaining that the budget gets wasted on voice actors is kind of just finding a reason to complain. Trust me, if Amazon was not spending that shit on voice actors, they would not be giving it to the animators. It's sad, but true. Because at the end of the day, people are simply not watching Invincible for the animation. Yes, I understand that the pig disgusting weeaboos like me would really like if the show looked better, but the fact of the matter is, most of the people watching the show just don't notice. After complaining about it for 2 seasons, I've decided I just don't care anymore. Sometimes the show looks good, sometimes it doesn't. It's whatever. Doesn't really change how I feel about the show at this point. And I will say that despite all of my complaining, the season starts and ends very strongly. The Mark versus Cecil conflict in the early episodes was really cool, and it sets the stage for the season in a compelling way, even if the rest of the season didn't really keep that hype up for me. I really did enjoy that little catch-up episode we have with Alan and Omni-Man. Yeah, they're only in 1 episode, but I think that episode was really good. Really, anytime this show cuts back to Alan, I'm on board. I fucking love that guy. And the final episode is basically non-stop, balls-to-the-wall crazy. When the last episode got rolling, I was basically that meme of the guy who sits up in his chair. The episodes leading up to the finale kind of really weren't doing it for me, and I started to wonder if this season was just kind of a little bit of a letdown. But then the last episode comes along, it grabs you by the throat, and it reminds you why you like Invincible. I don't know, at least that's what happened for me. I think Conquest's character is so interesting. He's just packed into this 1 episode, and I am fully invested in this character. Maybe that's what I felt like was missing from this season. I think that the Viltrumite stuff is just so much more interesting than any of the side stories they're trying to make work in this show. I think that Rex's side story was kind of manipulative and lazy. Like, it doesn't take a genius to tell what they're trying to do with this story. And by the end of it, I didn't really feel like I was left with the emotions that the show intended for me to have. But I think the Viltrumite conflict is super interesting. Whenever the show was covering stuff like that, I was fully invested. And yeah, it may seem strange that I'm still coming out of this season liking Invincible as much as I do when I didn't really love this season. But like I said, it's still a shonen anime to me. I may not like Fishman Island, but reading it didn't make me give One Piece a 5 out of 10. I can recognize a weaker arc when I see it, and hidden among these weaker storylines, I can still see the series that I very much enjoy. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Invincible Season 3 a 7 out of 10.